Brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have James Fuller from hnry joining us. How are you, James?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great privilege to have you on the show. Maybe just as we get started, you can give a quick intro to where you fit into this big wide world of tech and startups in New Zealand.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm James Fuller. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at hnry. We're an all-in-one accounting service for self-employed sole traders, contractors, and freelancers. And prior to hnry, I've worked as a startup coach, tech consultant, and way back when I was a software developer until I realized that was probably not the career for me.
Oh, that's funny. Well, yeah, it looks as though you're on a pretty good track now, James. So definitely looking forward to delving in and hearing a little bit about hnry. We know you've had a recent funding round that raised, was it 16 million New Zealand dollars?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And on a valuation of, was it 100 million?
That was the post, yeah, just over 100.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So definitely looking to delving in and hearing more about hnry. But let's jump into some of the news of the day. First up, I guess it's an ongoing topic. Is the challenge that we have with access to the right sort of digital skills here in New Zealand, and I saw RNZ covering this topic, and then this morning was on a call with Datacom and with AWS and a few others, and quite fascinating. Sort of hearing some of the discussions around the challenges that we have in terms of where we're at from a skills perspective, not just in the tech sector, but more broadly, across New Zealand business in terms of this lacking of skills. And in fact, with the discussion and the presentation from AWS and the research that they've recently had done, they highlight that we've got probably 1 million people in New Zealand that need to be upskilling from a digital perspective, just generally across all different sectors. And then we've got the challenges with software developers and people across the tech sector. How's that been playing out for you, James, in terms of getting access to the right skills?
Oh, I think it's something that all businesses are starting to see some impacts from. I think at hnry, we're currently going through a real kind of growth phase in terms of our hiring. So particularly on the engineering side, we're doubling the size of our engineering team. And we have to be pretty cognizant that out there, we've got a number of organizations in Australia and the US that are coming in and competing in the New Zealand market. And so for us, we sort of had a couple of choices, which is either we're going to compete back and we're going to compete on, kind of company culture and perks and remuneration, or we're going to have to be one of those organizations that is not going to be able to do that and is going to have to look for, where is our New Zealand, where is our other country that we're going to go and kind of dip into on a global basis. So it's really interesting to see how different companies are taking different approaches to it. For us, we're not seeing a huge impact of kind of losing out to people going for overseas companies because of the way we're competing. But I can imagine that if we were maybe earlier on in our journey and didn't have the same kind of brand cachet in the market for being a great employer, that actually it'd be a lot harder to compete for really good talent.
Yeah, it was interesting. Greg Davidson, who's the chief executive at Datacom, he raised the challenge where we're starting to, not only do we have the sort of limitation of the number of skilled people that are available in the country for tech roles, and we haven't had people crossing the border in our direction for a while now. Hopefully that's going to change. from a positive perspective, because there's also the reality that some Kiwis are going to be heading off, overseas as borders become open, more and more open elsewhere. But yeah, he was highlighting the challenge of people that are staying put in New Zealand, but being employed by American or Australian firms. So very much is a global market, isn't it? From that talent and work perspective.
Yeah, it is, and we're somewhat benefited by the fact that we have a Sydney office. So we opened our Sydney office kind of early last year. We're kind of serving the Australian market and seeing a lot of growth out there as well. And that does mean that we are seeing Kiwis who are going over to Australia, and because they know of Henry from New Zealand, they're saying, hey, look, really keen to work for Henry, but I want to live and work in Australia. So we have the advantage of being able to support that, and love being able to grow that Australian team as well. But I think also we're sort of, we are aware that there are sort of almost sort of a two-tier system that's emerging for a lot of roles, where there are people who are looking for jobs and they're saying, actually, the only thing I want to do is work from home, and I don't want to come to a communal workplace. I'm happier working for fully remote businesses and doing so even if those sort of time zones are different from my other colleagues. And then on the other hand, we have people who have actually spent some time working from home for long periods during COVID, and they're actually coming out the other side and saying, whilst that was great and that was, for some it was more productive, they're saying, actually, what I really miss is, going into the office in the morning, talking to the barista downstairs, having social interaction, chatting to my colleagues, playing board games at lunch, those kind of things, getting together for pizza with the team. And we very much serve that second part. We want to create really great culture for a business where people actually have that flexibility to work from home if they need to, but also want to come in and want to spend time with each other. But I think, businesses are all having to get to a point where they need to kind of pick a road. Because if you can't kind of have both, you can't say, well, we want some people can completely be remote and we'll never see them, and occasionally they'll pop up when they turn their video on Google Meet or whatever it is. But at the same time, we really want office culture. So I think there's a lot of conversations that are happening, which is which path do we want to take, and that very much dictates the sorts of candidates that you can attract in the market. Because there are some people who said to us, in fact, we've got a new starter coming in 3 weeks as part of our platform engineering team. And they said to me, I've been self-employed for maybe 3-4 years now. And they said, I'm sick of working at home or trying to find places to work. I want office culture. I want to come in and spend time with my peers, which we just think is fantastic. And we're all for that track, rather than maybe the other one, which is, okay, we don't kind of care where people live, just as long as they come in and they're good worker bees. That's not really our culture.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how are you finding that that mix in terms of from office to home, and how often are you finding that people? I'm sure this varies across your team, but how does that sort of play out in terms of working from home and in the office? Some people are saying, well, it's kind of 50-50, but it does seem to vary a fair bit. And of course, throw Omicron and COVID things into the mix, and some people are a bit shy, certainly at the moment, to still be in the office as well, right?
Yeah, we've left the choice with all of our staff, particularly at the moment, and said if you're not comfortable coming in, then that's fine. We've got a bunch of people who are working from home, so we kind of have a hybrid model going at the moment. And for the most part, I mean, we're so flexible as a workforce. We've got people working 6:30 till 3. We've got people who are doing some shorter days because they're doing child pickup. We've got some people doing 4.5 day weeks. I think you have to, as an employer, be flexible and open to the fact that, we only hire grown-ups, right? So everyone's responsible adults. We don't have to worry too much about that. The thing for us is that, particularly with our culture and the way that we work being highly collaborative, a lot of the things that because we move so quickly, we want to be able to have people be able to collaborate quickly, not have everything descend into a Slack conversation or have to be a meeting in order to get decisions made. And so we find that a lot of our staff just are more productive when they're together in some way. And so we haven't gone down the road of saying, well, actually, let's go for fully remote, let's employ from anywhere in the world, because we just don't think we're quite at that stage as a business where we're still, 50 people, where actually we have a very kind of sort of a collaborative and close-knit culture that is quite hard to sustain when you're going fully remote and you're kind of throwing open the doors to literally employing from anywhere in any time zone in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting over a period of years to sort of follow how some tech companies, some startups have an approach which means employing people in any location, any time zone. And that does make it quite challenging in terms of how do you build culture, how do you communicate with each other when you might be asleep when other people that you're trying to work with are working, and vice versa. So yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these things evolve going forwards. But I think COVID has certainly changed the picture probably a lot faster especially for non-tech firms, but I think across tech businesses as well. So really interesting to get your perspectives and how it's working for you.
Yeah, totally. I think it's really interesting, right? Because I think that we've seen a lot of our staff who, and particularly for maybe sort of younger people who are flatting, or for people who have children at home, it's been quite difficult for them, this push to remote work. And a lot of them find it actually quite difficult and quite distracting. And so I think it comes down to personal preference. Like if you want to be someone who wants to be fully remote, you have and I have a friend in London, for instance, who's been fully remote for the last couple of years. He has his home office set up. His previous commute was maybe an hour and a half each way. He has no interest in commuting, and he said to me, he's like, I'm not going into the city for anything anymore. I'm not leaving the house. I'm kind of, particularly with COVID, he said, I am here, and if I want to point my laptop at a different business, I can do that very, very quickly. I don't have to feel like I'm sort of hamstrung by the business that I work for. And I think whilst in his particular case, he's loving that flexibility of not wanting to feel tied down by an employer or have any allegiance to the employer, because he can just literally go, well, it's just another set of faces on a Zoom call each day if I want to go somewhere else. It does pose an interesting thing for employers, which is actually, like, how do you engage when you go down that road to say, cool, fully remote workforce, and I know some businesses here are doing it, that they say, let's go for a fully remote workforce. We don't have to be constrained by hiring within New Zealand. We can go and hire from wherever we're going to get the right skills at whatever price point makes sense for us. How do they then kind of keep that culture, keep that kind of touch point with the employee to the point that they feel connected to what's going on in the organization, and it doesn't just become a sort of a transaction for both sides. And I think that's a really interesting challenge, I suppose, that a lot of businesses that are going fully remote and go down that road are coming up against, which is actually how do you make sure that it doesn't just become a transaction? Because then you may as well be on Fiverr and Upwork, just kind of getting contract resource. Why, obviously with the nature of our business being flexible working for people who choose to be self-employed, the sort of the extreme end of the step is actually, starting to say, well, why are we employing people full time? Why not have self-employed sole traders, contractors fulfilling those roles for your business without the need to put full-time employment in place? So it's a really interesting spectrum and so many different diverse opinions on the best way to go.
Yeah, and we certainly saw before COVID some of those remote working organisations. They would be meeting up in person and flying to events in one location. But of course, the last couple of years hasn't made that particularly practical. Now onto the next topic. Headline. Caught me article from Rob O'Neill in NZ Reseller News around Bitcoin miners breaching LINZ, or Land Information NZ cloud service, and basically a little bit of a crypto jacking operation. So, for those that don't know, in 2022 you can literally print money. That's kind of the way crypto is generated. You put enough computing resource and you can generate some currency. And so I guess what these folks did was they managed to take hold of some cloud resources there from Linz, and use them for generating some funds for themselves, which is rather concerned that this sort of thing is as a reality. But of course it's going on all the time. We just don't often hear about it. And I think it's just a reminder that you can't sort of relax when it comes to cybersecurity. There's always more that can be done to lower the risk profile of a given organization, whether it's education, whether it's processes and change. But it is an ongoing journey. And whether it's a government department or a small private organization, we kind of have to work at this stuff. James, is it something that that creates a lot of pressure within hnry? I guess you've got your own approach for how you stay safe.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge thing for us, right? I mean we're processing in excess of $500 million of payments every year. We hold personally identifiable information. We're an accountancy first and foremost, with one of New Zealand's largest specialist accountancies. So the kind of data that we hold is just one part of the kind of security puzzle for us. We have we kind of take a kind of pretty broad lens, and we look at the sort of, there's the data security, there's the system side of things, there's even down to the physical security of our staff. And particularly where in our experience, where we've kind of come through 3-4 capital raises now, the risk profile of your business as it becomes larger is so much higher, in that people will say, okay, well, that is a target worth trying to attack. And so for us, it's a continual sense of keeping the highest possible security standards, whether that's using external parties to validate security, or having an incredible focus on it internally. It's probably one of the key threads that we kind of talk to our staff about, and we put implemented sort of systems in place for, is around security and monitoring. It's critical. You can't be a modern digital business in this age without that being probably your number one risk that any investor or staff member or kind of board member will come to you with, is where is the cyber risk when it comes to here, and being able to show your credentials first and foremost and say, look, here is how we operate, and it's probably in excess of what we need for the size of business we are, but you have to show that you take these things really seriously.
That's great to hear. I think it is often an area that startups can struggle with, and you talk about that sort of size factor, and there's lots of different considerations in terms of how you should invest and how much you should focus from a cybersecurity perspective. But that sounds really good. Now on to sort of international world, but of course all these things have a flow on in New Zealand. We heard about the Omicron situation in Hong Kong, which of course spilled across the border into Shenzhen, and China had, we understand, been really largely COVID free, and probably one of the few other locations that were following a somewhat similar plan to New Zealand to not have COVID, the elimination strategy. But of course, COVID is there now and spreading. And of course, we're so reliant on China when it comes to technology production, be it the newest smartphones that are coming through, laptops and computers that we need to keep to keep our organizations operating. So yeah, it was a little bit worrying hearing that, but the latest news seems to be that after sort of locking down for sort of a week or so, we're now in a position where Shenzhen seems to be opening up again, and they've basically announced a sort of return to work there, and varying venues and services are operating again, albeit sometimes at a sort of 50% of capacity. So reasonably encouraging, but who knows how these things are, what the flow on will be. And of course there's concerns around what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and different bits and pieces, and how that impacts as well. And of course our thoughts are with those in Ukraine. Pretty hard to get our head around what's going on there. The photos every day just kind of blows my mind. So are you sort of impacted? Have you been impacted with some of these sort of supply chain issues? I know you mentioned to me earlier that you've been hiring a lot of people, and obviously when you hire people, you generally need some technology for them to use. So how do you work around that?
Yeah, for us, it's become all about forward planning as much as you can, really. We're seeing it now that we almost need to be 5-6 months ahead of ourselves in terms of kind of road mapping the equipment that we need as we grow. We're just about to potentially take out a lease on a new office in Sydney, kind of new sort of 50 person office out there. And you think about the kit that you need in order to be fitting out an office like that. We probably need to be about 6 months ahead of ourselves because of the supply chain. So it's something that a lot of businesses have had to deal with, and I think everyone's very understanding of the kind of circumstances around it. It's just, whereas in the past you could plan, 2 weeks ahead for a new starter, suddenly you're 6 months in the future and you're thinking more about, what do you need to do in terms of those lead times. So not an insurmountable problem. And as you say, there's some far more kind of weighty things going on in the world right now than supply chain for some laptops. But it is something that I think everyone's having to think about in terms of, what are those kind of global impacts that we're seeing on a very local basis, and sort of have done over the last couple of years, I suppose, in terms of not just tech, but a number of sort of supply chain or kind of knock-on economic effects.
Yeah, and look, there are a lot of knock-ons, from all of these things. So, we do want to be as well organised and planning ahead as well as what we can do. Heard quite some worrying information. For another thing from Greg Davidson today was because Datacom, of course, do a lot of payroll, and he said that I think it was probably this past week. He said it had been the highest number of defaults that they've seen in payroll. So that means that a business that's got their payroll set up to go and to pay their people, but actually failing because the small business has insufficient funds to actually deliver that payroll to their staff. I guess these are things that are gonna keep happening over time, before we get back to a level of normality. And it's tough. And I guess for those of us working in the tech sector, to a large degree things are running in a pretty positive way, but that's not necessarily the case across right across the rest of the economy. On to another item that caught my attention. And this talks to the challenges of a more tech-enabled world that we're in, and it relates to a AEG combo microwave that has become unusable after an update to I guess to these German products from AEG sort of went awry. What I read online is it said an employee manually entered a wrong number somewhere, causing an incorrect update. As a result, all combi microwaves of this type no longer work. And this is in the Benelux region. So Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. I think that covers. Not a great position to be in if you're an owner of one of those products, or if you're the person at AEG that accidentally put the wrong number in the wrong box and clicked to roll it out. But we're kind of all at risk, aren't we, from things going wrong with technology? Because there's so many things happening. Whether it's a software vendor where something breaks and we can't work without that software, or down to our cars and everything else these days. So no doubt there'll be some good learning that comes out of that at AEG, shall we say?
You've got to imagine, I think, feel sorry for the consumers that are left on the other end of this, but imagine, I mean, if you're that individual that rolled out this change, I know it's bad enough having been someone who back in the early days of Henry managed to nuke our own website while doing some late night changes. Despite the fact this was back in 2017 where we had no traffic and no one was coming to it, like how bad I felt as to the impacts that had. But imagine if you're someone who's rolled out this change across the entirety of Benelux, and then it makes the tech news that was your change. But I think it's a timely reminder, which is, whether it's physical products or the kind of software that goes onto them, it's the need for testing, the need for validation, or even the need for a lot of things that we do. So we whether we're using beta tests or feature flags, we will deliberately roll something out to a handful of customers to start off with and measure the impact for a week or so before then going and iterating further. This is just a classic example of where you can release anything to probably hundreds of thousands of devices and cause significant impact, whereas just releasing it to a small handful of beta users first, even for a couple of days, and just checking that everything works as expected, probably not going to take you too much longer from a delivery process, but it's going to avoid some of this maybe not so positive news coverage.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shocker. And apparently these ovens now, after getting the update, they can't connect to Wi-Fi because of what the software update's done to them. So they can't just roll out another update. But yeah, apparently it is something that a technician will be able to go on site and actually address. So
they're gonna have to flash an oven back to factory. That's quite an undertaking. As someone who's had to flash a few devices around the office recently, it's not a fun thing to do. But imagine having to do that to how many thousands of affected devices it's quite a cost.
Yeah. Now for a bit of a blast from the past. COBOL. Now this is a really old school language. I think it was probably one of the languages that my dad was fluent in. Decades ago. I tried to learn it at Christchurch Polytech as a high school student, and wasn't very enamored by this so-called sort of business language. But it seems to be getting a bit of a fresh life. According to the register, it's now 63 years old, COBOL, and there seems to be a new variant available as sort of free open source software, which is kind of fascinating. And for those organizations that are still relying on it, I guess it opens up their options in terms of how they move forward. I would tend to think if you've got COBOL in your organization, you're probably trying to work out how to get rid of it. But sometimes with this sort of legacy technology, it can take a long time, which is partly why we see ongoing cybersecurity issues in larger organizations that have got so many legacy systems. It's not overnight. So I thought it was interesting to be reading about basically free versions of COBOL that can be run on modern technology. You don't need some old school system to to run it. That hardware in itself can be pretty pricey. Is COBOL something you've ever had to dabble with, James?
No, I managed to get away with that when I was studying computer science at university. It was there was lots of gnarly stuff that we worked with, but yeah, it was mostly, there was a bunch of Java and Perl and a couple of others, but no COBOL. I managed to avoid that one, luckily. But maybe it's coming back. Maybe we need to reconsider COBOL and see what the new variant. I enjoyed your use of the word variant, by the way, when describing COBOL. I thought that was very very apt. But no, not something I've had experience with.
Yep. Now, I guess just a bit of, there's a story that's come through about Vimeo, and I guess this is just a bit of a word of warning, really, in terms of as we pick different sort of technology platforms, you never quite know what a vendor's going to do. So you have to be a little bit cautious about how heavily you commit to one bit of technology or another. And I always think it's really important to be quite strategic with a software selection process, and really try and figure out what's going to serve you well in the long term. Of course, that isn't necessarily easy when you're a small business, or if you're, maybe just an individual, an independent, person that has to, commit to different technologies. But yeah, Vimeo have been in the media for basically dropping some huge cost increases on some of their user base, who they basically said, well, you're on the top 1%, so we're going to charge you, a whole lot more. People having to pay thousands of dollars of US, thousands of US dollars to keep going with those Vimeo services. And in some cases, these aren't videos that are necessarily getting thousands or tens of thousands of views. They might be getting hundreds of views, but it adds up to enough data. So yeah, it was interesting. Reading some coverage of that over the last few days, which Vimeo have sort of responded to. And they've changed their approach a little bit, but still probably not going to solve the issue for some folks that have basically bet on Vimeo to serve them, and possibly are going to be quite stuck with how they handle some of their content going forward. I guess you would be, James, in a position where you've got to bet on various technologies along the way, and try and make those strategic calls that must come up on a reasonably regular basis for you.
Yeah, it does. It's actually it's a really big thing. Particularly, we're a relatively young business, 4 or 5 years old. So a lot of what we bet on early on is some of these become kind of medium to long term decisions. And so I think we've always got to be conscious of the fact that to a certain extent you're at the mercy of the vendor if they decide to amp up their prices, and maybe kind of, when we've been victims of this a few times in the first few years of being in business, where we bet on a particular product because it's been appropriate for our use, and the pricing plan has been exactly what we needed, and then as that company grows or it changes its direction, suddenly you find yourself 3 times the cost on a monthly basis, and so we always kind of have a strategy where it's about never trying to become too wedded to a single platform without some sort of look to what are the alternatives, what would the opportunity be to go to the alternatives, what would the cost be, and to be constantly challenging ourselves to say, particularly as we grow and we look at our kind of software budget, to go, is this the right software for us and our needs, and how does it scale with us? And a lot of that is actually, as you start to get larger, actually engaging with those organizations. Once you come off the free plan and you start actually paying for a service, actually engaging with them at an early point and starting to understand what their kind of customer relationship management is like. Like, how do they deal with you as a customer? Are they receptive to questions or kind of working with you, particularly if you're kind of in that scaling kind of mode of a business and they can see that you're moving quickly? It's really interesting, those organizations that sort of shut the door on their customers and say, well, you might be paying for this service, but you can't really speak to anyone about it. And it's very much, when we look at our own service and the fact that, as an accountant, we can't not have humans. Like, you can't not have people to speak to people. So, our customers they can phone up, or they can jump on the live chat and they can speak to one of our experts at a moment's notice. If we were to suddenly turn that off one day and go, oh, well, that's not part of your plan, you need to pay extra to actually get accounting support, I think there'd just be a revolt. I just think, in terms of just general fairness and how to, really make sure that you're providing top-notch customer service, you have to be available for someone who is paying money for your service. So for us, it's very much a two-way relationship of starting to understand how do they deal with us as a customer, as a paying customer, what is their roadmap looking like, and trying to develop relationships with your suppliers effectively that allow you to maybe kind of see what's coming down the line and whether or not they're going to be a good long-term bet.
Yeah, it's the whole software selection process is a really interesting one. My team get involved in it, quite regularly, and it is always sort of a challenge when you come across a decision that's maybe been made before you get plugged in, and there's some pretty key things that haven't been considered that are really relevant in an individual scenario, because often if you do raise varying queries up front, you can get the clarity that you need, or you can get an agreement to maybe be a bit flexible, even if it's a big vendor. Often there's some flexibility if you say, look, from a security practice perspective, we need single sign-in, or we need a slightly different mix than what you're offering, or we need to know that your prices aren't gonna skyrocket, and you can get those things sort of committed to. But doesn't always happen.
No, and it can easily go wrong. I mean, I remember when I was a tech consultant many years ago, and we were working at I'll just call them a large SaaS vendor, and they were choosing a new VoIP platform to integrate with their CRM, and they did all the right things in terms of they had quite a lean process, a sort of balanced scorecard, assessing different vendors against different different lenses, whether it's scalability or kind of feature set or pricing. And they were running a very quick process, which I think was positive. But in the end, whilst there was a room of people that I think 5 out of 6 of them all decided one way, the most senior person in the room said, nope, we're going this way, and decided based on personal preference that this was the strategic tool for them. And ironically and unsurprisingly, I think within about 3 weeks of switching it on, performance issues, feature issues, and they had to literally pull the whole thing out. And they said at the time, they chalked it up to, well, sometimes when you move quickly, you move fast, break things. But it was really kind of an absence of rigor, even at the basic sense that kind of led it there. So, taking that as a lesson, the recommendation to everyone is, even if you're running a very, very basic process and you're doing something quite light touch, you've got to have some sense of rigor of, are these people that we can see ourselves scaling with as our business grows, or even can we see them engaging with us and supporting us as even if our business isn't growing at a kind of split scaling basis. So I think it shows the dangers of what can happen when you don't look at that strategic view, and then potentially you end up in bed with a vendor who rapidly changes their pricing model and leaves you scrabbling to find an alternative.
Yeah. I remember chatting to Mark Rees, the Chief Technology Officer at Xero last year, and he spent a good chunk of his time before he stepped into the CTO role, migrating Xero from Rackspace to AWS. It was just such a huge thing. So I'm not sure what the situation was in their case. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary, and you don't have any foresight, and you just made the best decision possible at a given time. But you certainly want to do the best you can to get these things as right as you possibly can do. The other thing, before we jump in and hear about Henry, I see the James Webb Space Telescope from NASA is all online, and we're starting to see imagery coming through, which is pretty pleasing. There's a very, very long-term project, and pretty exciting to see it sort of come to fruition. So I guess that's the next space phase of sort of technology for looking out into the great beyond. It's pretty cool. James, tell us a little bit about where, maybe a bit of a background on, how Henry started and what it is that Henry does, for those that aren't aware. Although I've been driving by Henry billboards on the way to work recently, so I guess getting out there a bit more publicly than maybe what you have done previously. Are you sort of scaling up your marketing and advertising?
Yeah, we are at the moment. So the most recent funding round, a lot of that is really kind of growth spending. But I mean, Henry was kind of born out of personal pain back a few years ago when my co-founder and I became self-employed. We just went for roles that happened to be contracts. I was doing some user experience work at one of the banks, and Claire was working in government. And we were just blown away by the amount of financial admin that contractors and freelancers are subjected to. This kind of idea that you have to go and get an old school accountant and register a company, and then go and get trained how to use this kind of overcomplicated accounting software, when really you're just there to do a job. You're not trying to grow a small enterprise. And so we actually just started with a couple of spreadsheets just to make our lives easier. And once we told some friends and they told some friends, we realized that actually this was a genuine problem that people have, which is, number one, not knowing how much money is theirs and how much money they should be putting aside for tax. And number two, the sort of industry was very much set up against the sole trader and very much promoting this idea of overcomplicating yourself by kind of adding in all of this additional effort. So Henry in a nutshell is, we talk about it being three things. The first of which it's a unique bank account that everyone gets when they sign up, and every time they get paid, we calculate, deduct, and pay all of their taxes, and then we lodge all their taxes as their accountant. And the second thing we do, we provide like right-sized web and mobile apps for sole traders, for freelancers, so they can do things like invoicing and raise their expenses for us to review, and they can set financial plans and go and get access to loans and mortgages, which has been a big pain point for the sole trader community. And then the third thing is, as we kind of touched on earlier, is kind of having expert support. So Henry is one of New Zealand's largest specialist accountancies, and our team is basically on hand to help sole traders and contractors and freelancers get the most out of being a sole trader, whether that's talking about what you might be able to claim as expenses or giving information around COVID support and resurgence payments. So effectively, we've sort of taken an approach which is around providing a really high quality service to sole traders, both here in New Zealand as well as in Australia. So we've seen some fantastic growth in the last few years. Most recently, I think last 18 months, we've grown about 500%. So really starting to scale very quickly. And so we just, in our most recent funding round, very late last year, we just announced earlier this year, we raised $16 million from a US venture fund called Left Lane. And they've heavily invested in the business just purely because of the growth trajectory. And we love them from the networks that they bring from a global perspective. They've got a fantastic portfolio alongside our existing investors such as EVP and Icehouse and Angel HQ. So yeah, it's been a really exciting few years, and we're at this point now where, having achieved such a strong product market fit, we're actually able to, being large enough, really start to influence some of the conversation in New Zealand around sole traders. And very recently, as of I think last Monday, released the latest edition of what we call the Sole Trader Pulse, which is our sort of independently run survey of the sole trader community in New Zealand. And then we do a separate one in Australia, which is a kind of fascinating look at what sole traders are up against at the moment. And some really interesting stats there in terms of, the average, your average tradie that's not using Henry is spending upwards of 14 hours a week on their financial admin. And so you start to work out that, the traditional model of old school accountant plus small enterprise software, it's actually costing the New Zealand economy about $3.2 billion every year in lost productivity. And you look at what we're doing and the savings that we make for people, both financially, from a mental angst perspective, as well as from a time saving perspective. And it's actually just a really exciting journey to be a part of, where you're actually really bringing genuine change to people who are crying out. Like some of these tradies, 14 hours a week. I mean, I don't know how long you're spending on financial admin, Paul, but 14 hours a week that's an eye-watering amount of time to just be, I don't know, reconciling transactions. Like, I don't know what the guys are doing, but it sounds like it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it does. And don't have that challenge these days with being a sole trader. But I do remember being in the UK quite a few years ago, actually, and I did some contract work there for one of the big banks, and the entity that I went through, I can't remember how much, what percentage they took of what I was earning, but it was, I think it was a reasonably big chunk. How does your model work? Because you operate on a percentage basis that is very, very simple, isn't it? Tell us about that, and do you think you'll be able to stick to the simplicity that you've set it at, for the company's future?
Oh, I mean, first of all, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think the price point, we just think we're very big on fairness as a business. It's something that drives us quite a lot, and we charge on a percentage of income basis. So for sole traders, we charge 1% of their sole trader income, their self-employed income, and that's up to a cap. So if you're a high earner and you earn over $150,000 a year, your fees will max out at $1,500 across the entire year, and for that you get unlimited. All of your taxes filed, so that's your income tax, your GST. You get unlimited use of our app, of our expert support. So we're sort of rolling everything all into one. And you kind of, someone said to me the other day, kind of what's the equivalent, like what's the competitor that you're kind of disrupting here? And it's really that combination of, old school accountant, small enterprise accounting software. You're probably running a couple of spreadsheets. You've got a business bank account. You might be paying for payment gateways like Stripe or PayPal. And that whole idea, and then you kind of whatever incidental costs of additional accounting support from professional services that you might not get from your existing provider, and you ball all that up, and it's no surprise that you see sole traders spending $10,000-$11,000 a year in cumulative cost for all of these different services. So for us, it's very much about being able to say, look, this is a sense of fairness here by a 1% pricing model, and it's pay as you go, which means you can still get access to the service. If you have a quiet month as a sole trader, you can still ring up, you can still use the service. You're still, you're getting the benefit, because we know we're kind of big investors in people. So we know that you're a sole trader, you're self-employed, you're a freelancer. We know that you're not always going to get paid every month. But that doesn't mean that we cut you off from financial services and say, oh no, you're not able to get any help. We're not going to give you any technical support. It's very much about providing a service that says, look, this is pay as you go, because that's how sole trading works. That's how contracting works. Your whole world is pay as you go. And mostly because Claire and I are not big fans of subscription models. I think, we've both been in the position in the past where, you get that impetus in January to join a gym, and then you go along and you're like on a $30 a month monthly contract or whatever, and after 2 months you drop off the face of the earth, and then you can't be bothered going in and having that awkward conversation, so you end up having this charitable donation of $25-$30 a month to the gym. Like for us, subscription models were just painful experiences. So pay as you go just seems like a fair and sensible model that we're very committed to kind of to continuing as we scale, particularly as what we've shown is that actually it's 7 or 8 times cheaper than the alternative, and brings about a whole bunch of kind of more positive mental satisfaction and job satisfaction, knowing that people can get on with what they enjoy doing rather than having to worry about tax payments and filings, which I'll be the first to admit that's super dreary.
I'm in agreement there, even though at school at one point I thought I wanted to become an accountant, but I soon found technology. Now, with this recent funding coming in, that's led to a situation where you need to hire a lot more people. What does that look like in terms of your scale people wise, and what opportunities do you see that creating?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating thing. I don't think I've ever been part of a process where we've tried to hire, literally double the size of the business in a handful of months. So we're hiring across engineering, across product, sales and marketing, operations. And it's really exciting. It's actually one of those where I think condensing it into a short space of time is actually quite energizing when you're having interviews with people and you're telling the story. And obviously you can tell I get super excited about our journey here, but telling the story of Henry and seeing people going away really excited about the opportunity of working with a high performing team. It's actually it's a very energizing experience. Obviously we're as we were talking about earlier, there's certain sort of challenges that we see that we've got to overcome when it comes to attracting people from who are kind of getting competition from overseas companies. But what we find is actually being a fast-growing Kiwi company that is looking locally at bringing resources in, there's a certain amount of kind of cachet that we get from the recruitment market, where actually every day people are contacting us and saying, hey, I'm just really excited about the journey. I want to have an opportunity to work at Henry. And we're very much of the opinion that with smart people, you can kind of fit smart people into your organization without having to pigeonhole them into a specific role. So we would always encourage people that if they're excited about the journey, they want to help people, they want to join a business that is scaling incredibly quickly, check out our careers page, come and put your CV in the mix. We will consider all comers. It's very much an opportunity for people to come and be part of a really big kind of Kiwi success story.
Cool, that's neat. Anything else you want to add before we finish up? I'm certainly hoping we'll get a chance to sit down with you, again in the future, to maybe do a sort of a full deep dive into the Henry story. But it's been great to get a little overview today, James.
No, absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to chat.
Great. Thanks, James. And thanks, everyone, for listening into the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We'll, of course, be back again next week. And heads up to, look out for Henry and follow them across their, social platforms if you're interested in what Henry's up to. That's HNRY is what you need to search for. And, of course, for NZ Tech Podcast and myself, you can find me across those social platforms. And most weeks these days we are streaming live. So if you do follow across, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, we tend to end up on most of those with a live stream as well. If you like to listen in live, otherwise through your usual podcast apps. James, if anyone wants to get in touch, what's the best way of connecting?
Oh, just at Henry on social media, HNRY. Our team more than happy to help, or just go to henry.co.nz, come and chat to one of our team. It's not robots, it's real people. And everyone loves solving problems and answering people's questions. So don't be a stranger.
Excellent. That's great. All right. Thanks, James. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.